This point is so important, guys. You really need to avoid this at all costs to give yourself the best chances of preparing well for your exam. Here are 7 things you should never do while studying for the CFA exams, or any academic program for that matter. By the way, in just a few days, I'm competing in a fundraising event focused on educating underprivileged kids in financial literacy. They're just not teaching kids about money in schools anymore, so it would mean a lot to me if you could click the link in the description down below. When you go to make a donation, you can select my name from the drop-down list. That'll give me credit, and I'll try to raise the most funds so we can try to teach the most kids possible about financial literacy. I appreciate it. Number 1 is starting a Netflix series, or any TV series really. The way that television series are made today are almost designed to make you forget how much time you're spending watching that show. So when you're a CFA candidate and you're fighting to get in at least 300 hours for each of your 3 exams, spending 8 hours on a Saturday watching the newest release from Netflix is not going to be beneficial to helping you get the study hours in that you need. And trust me, the producers of these shows want you to binge them. They want you to sacrifice all of your available free time spending it watching their program. It's really peculiar how in American culture today, binging a TV show is not only an acceptable thing, but sometimes like a laughable thing that people do. Hey, I didn't have that much going on, so I binged 3 seasons of whatever. At least people are being honest about this, but it's readily admitting that you wasted so much valuable life watching something that you'll never gain any benefit from. And like I mentioned, this can be especially problematic when you're supposed to be studying for a CFA exam and every hour in your schedule can be utilized and should be utilized to the fullest potential, but instead you're addicted to the 3rd season of some show that just came out, and so you miss really valuable study hours. Take my advice, just probably don't watch any Netflix at all while you're a CFA candidate. The second item on this list, sometimes people will pursue and then become very prideful about it and try to brag about this, when in reality there's almost no way that it's benefiting them towards their next CFA exam, and that is signing up for another academic program. People have mentioned in comments before that they've also pursued the CAIA or the FRM while they're a CFA candidate, studying for 2 different financial programs. Sure, there's going to be some overlap, but they're not the exact same content. Remember what you signed up for here with the CFA exam. The overall pass rate right now is somewhere between 2 and 4%. Right? The vast majority of candidates fail. Given that reality, it's important to understand that any other thing that takes mental capacity, even if it is another academic venture, it's going to take away from your brain's cognitive ability to remember all the CFA practice questions and CFA formulas you've been studying. It's not going to benefit you towards this very difficult goal you have. I also think that's a bit of a greedy approach because you're trying to take on 2 challenges at once just to get done with them quicker. Just be realistic about this. If you're signed up for a CFA exam and you're actively studying for that exam, only do that program. Now, although number 3 was pretty important to me, it may not be the best advice for you, so consider your own situation. But I found it important not to tell many of my friends or family about what I was doing while I was studying for all of the exams. Now, the primary factor why I didn't want to tell anyone about what I was doing was just out of the fear of failure, the fear of them knowing that I was working towards what I would just tell them is a graduate degree, kind of like an MBA sometimes, and them asking me updates on how things were going, and then ultimately me likely telling them, oh, I had failed out of that program, and I just kind of wanted to avoid the shame of that type of a conversation, I suppose. But I also think it can be generally beneficial to avoid talking about the CFA program because 95% of the feedback you're going to get from friends and family, or coworkers for that matter, is going to be,
oh, you're smart, I know you'll be able to pass it.
Or something like,
oh, you've got this in the bag, don't worry about it.
And all of these generally misinformed and over-optimistic comments from people who are just trying to be nice, right? They're just trying to encourage you and help you. But for the reality of a CFA candidate, if you're really considering your probability of passing all 3 exams and becoming a charter holder, and that probability is very low, then it probably doesn't feel all that good to have people telling you, hey, don't worry about it, I know you're smart, you're going to be just fine. To the very few friends and family members who I would tell exactly what I was in pursuit of while I was a CFA candidate, whenever they said these things like, hey, you're going to be just fine, I just always wanted to scream, no, I'm not. You don't understand how difficult this thing is. And that's a perfect segue into my 4th point, which is never to underestimate the difficulty of the CFA program. Especially if you're studying for level 2 or level 3, the generally accepted rule of thumb in the number of hours you need to spend studying, which is 300, for the vast majority of candidates is not enough. Remember, that's an average. Like the CFA Institute has literally said that the average candidate puts in 300 plus hours, whatever exactly that means. But also the average candidate fails out of the program before ever passing level 3. Actually, the vast majority of candidates fail out of the program before ever passing level 3. So if you're going to be realistic about trying to become a charter holder, you need to be studying far more than what most candidates who fail out of the program study. And this is exactly why I always recommend a 500 plus study hour strategy. You can watch some of my other videos to see the details on how I think those 500 hours need to be spent. But if you're a level 1 candidate and you haven't actually considered how tough this thing can be, you should. And if you're a level 2 or level 3 candidate who just squeaked by level 1, understand that the road ahead becomes much more difficult and you're going to have to do a lot more than what most people talk about. Number 5 is probably the issue that most people suffer from. Maybe 99% of candidates suffer from this at some point during their studies, and that would be using social media instead of studying. When I say social media, I'm primarily referring to TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, Facebook, things that people spend the most time on. These social media apps nowadays are so good at distracting you. They are so good at giving your brain these dopamine hits that it really wants, especially when you're like down bad and you're struggling studying through level 2 fixed income binomial interest rate trees and you have no idea what you're doing. They're so good at keeping your attention. They make it so that you don't really ever want to look away to do anything else, especially when that other thing is very difficult. Your brain, when presented with a really difficult thing and continuing to study and scrolling through Facebook, is naturally going to want to do that all the time. So my recommendation during your 3 or 4 hour study periods is get your computer and phone away from you in as much as you're able to get access to the information you actually need to study. However you do it, you should make social media distractions as minimal as possible because, like I said, 99% of people are going to suffer from this at least at 1 or 2 instances during their journey, and they're going to get the best of you. You're going to have to actively avoid all social media sites to give yourself the best chance of staying focused, putting in all the hours you need to be able to pass your exam. Number 6 is to never get discouraged, and this can be very difficult to do. A lot of people talk about the burnout from CFA studying or doing any other task repetitively for years and years for that matter, but at the root of burnout is discouragement. And think about it, if you're doing something repetitively for years and years, but you are progressing and enjoying the process a little bit, you're not going to as easily get burned out at that thing. You're going to be more encouraged and more motivated to continue doing it. And the only way to avoid discouragement while studying for a CFA exam is to understand that there are going to be very, very difficult days, and that's perfectly okay. There are going to be days where you sit at your desk for 3 hours, maybe multiple days in a row, 6 to 9 hours, where you feel like you don't learn a single thing. You struggle and struggle and struggle and can't seem to wrap your head around a certain concept or figure out how to solve a certain type of problem. Of course, you don't want to waste like a week or weeks studying for one specific type of problem. At some point, you should probably use like a video lesson or reach out to a tutor or something like that. But the point is, you're definitely not going to understand the most difficult or even the moderately difficult concepts throughout the CFA program on the first or second or third pass even. You need to go into every study day knowing that you are going to struggle, and only through that struggle can you learn. You can only really grasp something if you've failed at it a few times, realized why those other ways don't work, and then figure out the one way that does work. It totally shapes your thinking around the solution, and it is the best way to learn anything, struggling through it, failing multiple times, and then eventually learning. So you need to try to love that grind, and you need to try to not get discouraged when the difficulties are facing you. It's just going to happen. Approach it positively. Try to appreciate the failure because you know that ultimately that failure is going to be what helps you learn onto the other side. The last one on this list, number 7, is the biggest one. This is the one that has the highest probability of making it so that you cannot pass the exams and become a CFA charter holder relative to everything else on this list. And that would be committing wide-scale international securities fraud. If you hack into the security system of a global investment bank and you embezzle hundreds of billions of dollars from them, and then you subsequently crash that company and its millions of clients lose all of their deposits, then there's a chance the CFA Institute might not even let you take the next CFA exam. There are countless examples of white-collar criminals stealing millions and millions of dollars from unsuspecting civilians in the past and receiving far shorter prison sentences than even guys on the street selling 10 grams of marijuana. So we know that the justice system is pretty favorable of white-collar criminals, at least here in the United States. However, the CFA Institute does have a couple policies in place, and they don't make it very well known. I mean, the ethics section doesn't really mention this type of stuff explicitly, but if you are convicted of multinational wide-scale securities fraud, then they could open an ethics investigation against you and potentially not let you sit for your next test. So I'm not necessarily saying not to do it. I'm just saying if you do it, don't mention my name in the investigation into your misconduct, or maybe I should say potential misconduct. Just, proceed with caution when taking on any actions of your choosing. I appreciate you sticking around to the end of this YouTube video. As always, thanks for watching.